When we finished up our training with Microvellum, the two significant takeaways I knew we were lacking, one was in the drawing templates. And the spec groups were a huge thing. We did a day or whatever in training on spec groups, and I was, is this really how we're going to do this? And we touched on formula-driven materials in there, but there was no way we were going to get to that starting up. And in the spec group management, without a wizard like you've helped us with, I think is very daunting for the users. Going in and find and replace and trying to get all the materials and the pointers correct for the spec group you do was a huge piece of why we didn't adopt it internally more quickly. The wizard that you showed us originally and have helped us with was a complete eye-opening and ease of operation for our operators. And it's allowing us to propagate Microvellum further in our operation.
Welcome to Verify in Field, the Millwork Podcast. Your host, Jacob Edmond, CEO of DuckWorks, will be interviewing experts in the industry to bring you insights and knowledge about the latest trends, techniques, and challenges in millwork. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, this podcast is for you. So sit back, relax, and join us as we explore the world of millwork. Here's Jacob.
Welcome back, everybody, to Verify in Field. Today we've got an exciting guest, a friend and a client of ours at DuckWorks, and Matt Oberlies, who is a partner in Vogo Cabinets out in the Denver area. So welcome. Thanks for joining me today, Matt.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I think to get started, it'd be awesome if you want to share a little bit about your background, because I know you didn't start your career in millwork, I believe, right? You guys formed Vogo. You have a partner, Scott, and but talk a little bit about your background. You know, what was your career journey and how you guys started Vogo?
Sure. Well, I was a civil engineer undergrad and spent most of my career in the building design and construction industry, and ended up in Denver in 1998 on a project, and then went off on my own in 2004 as a general contractor. And Scott and I hooked up during that general contracting phase and worked together for probably almost 10 years in Denver, doing light commercial work and residential remodel projects and new construction. And then in 2014, our millwork supplier, a guy named Matt Miller, and a company called Mylark up in Windsor, Colorado, who we had used for like 8 years and loved him and all that. We were chatting one day. He was down in Denver, and we were encouraging him to open either a Denver showroom or a Denver operation. And he said he didn't want to do that because he prefers to be up in Windsor, but said, why don't you guys do it? And we said, sure, would you help us? And he said, yes. So we effectively replicated his operation. Equipment. We went to the show in Atlanta in 2014 and bought all of our big equipment. And he was there with us. He helped train our people in his methods and his operation. And we started making cabinets in early 2015. And the only significant deviation from his plan at his direction was don't use the production software, the design and production software that we're using, that he was using. And that was Cabinetware, I think. And he continued using that until a couple of years ago, I think. But he was like, don't use that. And that was the one thing we did differently. And that was, so it's been it's been 10, it'll be 10 years this year that we've been in business in this location.
Awesome. And the whole time there in that physical building, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. We found, so we went out in 2014 and bought all the equipment, and then we found this building and got it fixed up and moved in and started, I think we received all the equipment in November, late 2014. And a month and a half later, we were making cabinets.
Wow, that's awesome. And so was there a transition? Because at that point, you guys still were, I assume, doing, contracting and not millwork, right? But this was to supplement that. What was that transition like to starting this business? And, was it, hey, let's complete a few projects, or we're going to continue business as usual, but also do this?
Yeah, good point. Originally, our intent was that we would continue growing the contracting business and keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And then this cabinet operation would kind of be on the side, and we would be able to get all of our millwork and cabinetry needs out of this shop, but then also let the shop sell to whoever else wanted to buy products. And we did that for probably 3 years. And I think Scott and I came to the conclusion that it was, and I should mention, Nick is the third partner in the cabinet operation. He wasn't involved in the construction business, but he jumped in. So there's 3 of us in Vogo Cabinets. But for the first, it was definitely busy, like trying to get this thing started up and keep the other business running was tough. And after probably, I think it was 2 or 3 years, we just said, we like making cabinets more than we like being general contractors.
Yeah.
So we kind of just finished up the projects we had and went full time into Vogo.
Wow. So was your first job for Vogo your own work?
It was. And I don't know if I remember exactly which one it was, but yeah. So it was kind of nice because probably 50% of the projects we built as general contractors, we also did the design work, not the structural engineering, but the light architecture, I would call it, if it was pretty simple. And then, so anyway, it was nice to have our operation here to do the design and fabrication of all the casework and millwork. But it was great. And we had, it's just nice to have full control over it.
Right. So you were a civil engineer, so you somewhat had a engineering and design background. What was that transition like for you? Like day one, were you the guy doing most of the design and for the cabinet anyways? Like, was it something you were doing already and now you were just kind of taking it to another level of detail?
I was in the design and construction work we had done before Vogo. I probably did, 50% of the cabinetry layouts and elevations, but very, pretty generically. And then when we were using Millark up north, he would basically take what I did and put the real details into it. And then a lot of times though, we had architectural drawings or interior design drawings that we went off of. Mm-hmm. So when we started Vogo, I wasn't involved in I was sort of involved in the initial training around the software we were using, which at the time was WoodCAD CAM, or it was an iMOS product. And we started out with one guy running that, and he went through the training, and I sort of knew it, but I didn't really get into it. And then as we grew, we ended up with, I think we had three people, designers on that. And then, and all the time I never got fully trained or was really using it. So I really wasn't doing much of the design work. And then about 2 years ago, we wanted to make the switch to Microvellum. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead of the story, but when we did that, I participated in the training originally and have been pretty heavily involved ever since, which has really been fantastic.
Okay, so it's really the transition to Microvellum when you've dove in and been really hands-on.
On the design side.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And I mean, in the upfront, the startup of the business of Vogo was, a lot of it was around the facility. So
Yeah.
we leaned on, the experience Scott and I had as general contractors to get the building up and get the equipment connected and all that kind of stuff. So it was less about what's being done in the software and for me anyway, and how we're designing it than, is the edge bander running and is the roof in good shape?
Do you recall, because you said about 2 years in, it was, hey, we really like doing this better. Let's just do this full time going forward, right? Do you recall any specific events or kind of things that were, significant in that decision? Or are there things that surprised you that you were like, man, we're better at this, or this is easier and I don't have to deal with these headaches that we've been having type of stuff?
I mean, I think it was a combination of things. Nick, our third partner, would tell you that he encouraged us to stop doing construction projects and being general contractors and to really focus on Vogo because in his opinion, it needed it. And he was right. So it was part of that. And then it was also, there was also some fatigue, in that Scott and I had relative to, being a general contractor, especially in some of the residential work. It's tough. I mean, everything is your problem and there's always time and money pressures. Not that there aren't in any operation, but, it was, he and I kind of came to that conclusion too, that we would really prefer to focus on Vogo and selling and getting the operation running more smoothly, more quickly.
Yeah.
It was our, it was a big part of our, of how we've done with Vogo has been the sales that we've generated. And a lot of those were generated by connections that we had in the Denver community.
Right.
Other builders and general contractors, and certainly designers and architects. And and when we first started, we said, hey, we've got this cabinet shop called Vogo, but we're still doing projects, and then we phased out the projects. But those relationships were important to keep the pipeline growing and full.
Right. It wasn't like you were just starting blind from day one as a millwork shop with no connections, no experience, right? It was an evolution of what you were doing. And if anything, maybe more of a kind of a specialization or niching down.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. And I mean, we early on, we weren't sure if if it made sense to tell our full story, but as we learned pretty early on, it's been a huge asset for us serving our new Vogo customers, understanding what they go through, particularly the builders and the general contractors, whether it's commercial or residential. We understand the challenges they have, and I think we're set up, and the model of the business, our business model from the beginning with Vogo was to serve builders, general contractors, architects, engineers, designers, and hopefully be able to accommodate the entire spectrum of their millwork package for a given project.
Right.
And generally set up for very custom work. And we've really followed that, and it's worked out well. And I think our perspective, the perspective Scott and I had from the beginning, having been in their shoes and worked through all that stuff, was really helpful, and it continues to be.
Awesome. So today, you guys do largely residential, higher end type residential, right? But you do a little bit of everything too, right?
We do. It varies, and it depends on if you'd classify a multifamily residential as residential or commercial.
Right.
But even if you classify those as commercial, we're probably, I would say over the 10 years, we've averaged 70 or 80% residential and 20 or 30% commercial.
Right.
And some of the commercial stuff is actually fun. I mean, it seems, generally the GCs that are doing some of the commercial projects we've worked on come to us for some of the specialty stuff that they can't get from a normal commercial millwork outfit, like some of the decorative and centerpiece architectural components that they have for some of their projects.
Right. And
actually,
are you finding?
Can you see it in the? It's kind of hung up there. Let me see if I can zoom in. This was a mock-up for a project. It's sitting on a stool way back there, but see that like truss column looking thing?
Oh,
kind of blends into the rest. So that's a current mock-up for a pickleball bar with pickleball courts, and that's their marquee architectural component. Yeah. And we had bid on the cabinetry for that project and some of the other kind of standard millwork, and they were like, "Hey, can you build these truss columns?" And we were like, "I don't know. I don't think we really want to," but no one else would do it. So we did it, and it came out great. And we used Microvellum for that. And
I was going to say
CNC
that's what we were looking at yesterday, I think, right? That project.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yeah, those things go around the bar, and they're pretty cool.
Got some shelves in them, under them.
Exactly.
Okay, so I guess that's a little bit of a segue, because the way we got introduced, I'm trying to remember if it was, maybe Matt from Microvellum that referred you to us, or somebody else, but
I think Jackie found you guys online.
Oh yeah, that's right. So Jackie found us. Okay. But it was ultimately, reaching out for, advice and help on Microvellum, I believe. And so you've been transitioning over the last couple of years from Wood CAD/CAM, Omega IX to Microvellum, right?
Correct.
And you guys' use case is a little bit, maybe not unique, but it's specific, especially on the residential side. You have kind of designers, project managers, right, who are designing up front, and before Microvellum, up till now, you've had people not only using Wood CAD/CAM, but also other software to do the design, either just AutoCAD or some 2020 or some other things, I think, right?
Exactly.
And then it's, how do we get all that into Wood CAD/CAM or now Microvellum to actually produce? And that is very common, I find, especially for like residential shops, that their workflow is a little different than a traditional commercial shop, where it's just the GC asks for, you get the job and you got to do some middle drawings. And, with what you guys are doing, a lot of times you're doing more like design assists to some extent, right? And a lot of the upfront is being able to not just see in 2D, but in 3D and really, and getting kind of renderings or 3D models and stuff. And so there is a learning curve in transitioning from any software to any other software, right? But also with that, it's how do we do that in a way, because this is something I really have, and a lot of clients and a lot of companies that struggle with, is like, okay, one, there's a learning curve to get the type of person that I have in my company that they need to be able to do the design, but they're not really full designers, engineers from a software standpoint, right? Like they don't necessarily need to be able to fully send output to your CNCs, right? You need them focusing on what the client needs, but ideally in a way that you're not redoing the work that they do in the software, right? When it gets time to go engineering. And so that is always a tough decision for a lot of people, because a Microvellum or even a Wood CAD/CAM can be cumbersome and complex for that level of interaction. Like, hey, I just need to be able to put some products in kind of have a configurator and get a quick rendering, get a quick 3D model or something out, and not have to worry so much about like, hey, do I have the right tool number, the routing, all that type of stuff. There's a learning curve there. And so figuring out how to do that while hopefully kind of creating rails of like, hey, we want you to choose what options we want to offer. Like, hey, here's our different slide options. Here's what we want to do in this case. So creating the interface to kind of guide them towards the right decisions is really valuable, right? So what was that experience like for you up front? Obviously there was a point in time where you made the decision, hey, we're going to switch from wood CAD/CAM to Microvellum. So how did that come about, I guess, initially?
Well, we were actually trying to, when we started out, we were on, and still are, I think, on wood CAD/CAM version 12. And it was, the support was being kind of turned off, and we really needed to upgrade, to IX. I think there was a version of IX, between 19 and the version of wood CAD/CAM we were on. We knew we needed to at least get current with, if we were going to stick with wood CAD/CAM. And they had since switched to IX. I think it was IX 17 and then IX 19. And we were going to jump kind of right over to IX 19. We went through that process, set up a new server. We wanted to have both of them running so we could have version 12 running for our old stuff and then have a clean new server with a new SQL instance and all that for IX 19. And then we started training on the newer version with everybody. A guy came in, and the general recommendation was, we think you guys, IX, we think Vogo needs to build a custom library. And when we kind of looked at the expense and the duration of that, we kind of choked on it. And then I started looking around, and I had never used Microvellum, but we had heard of it over the years. So we called Matt Perisher from Microvellum. He came in and showed us Microvellum and what it could do. And as you know, the concept of the two softwares are pretty similar.
Yeah.
Relational database and an AutoCAD drafting engine on the front end. But I was personally intrigued by a U.S. company, and the support and what would go along with that. And it was always, IMOS as a German company, was always like, when you would get into the database a little bit, so much of it was in German, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to understand how it was functioning behind the scenes if you needed to get deep into it. So anyway, that was kind of the story of how we got to Microvellum, and that was in early 2022, so 2 years ago from today.
Yep. Okay. And so you guys are using it today. I know you and Paul and are in the process of transitioning, the rest of the team. You're using the foundation library, right?
Yeah.
I think you started straight away into that, I assume, right?
We did. And I remember during the sales cycle, Matt at Microvellum had said, we have this new foundation library. Is that what you guys want to use, or do you want to use kind of the old? And we were like, well, we don't know what that is. And what's your recommendation? And they said, we think you should use the foundation library. So that's what we went with.
Yep. And by and large, it's been able to do most everything you needed to do, I think, right? The library itself, the products and stuff.
It has. We kind of stumbled though, early on. And it's hard because when you've got a functioning software and people using it, and you're in production and you're trying to switch over to a new thing, it's, there's not so much a hesitancy, but there's a, when am I going to do this kind of feeling, from our designers, which was understandable. So So I ended up kind of jumping more into it. And, with just the general business distractions, probably couldn't spend enough time on it to get it to the point where we could internally really start using it. The library that came, the foundation library that came with the ship with Microvellum, to your point, is actually great. There's, once you adjust for the different, how we build cabinets versus how it comes out of the box, it really worked well. Like, we never had a problem really with the machining. Well, once those global variables were set, I think our struggle though was if we had somebody internally, who was probably more technically savvy than, our designers or myself for the couple 6 months or a year, I think it would have made a big difference. Cause a couple weeks of training, you'll learn how to use the software as an operator, but not as a true nuts and bolts, configuration, developing new products, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I think that was, if we were doing it again, and we knew about DuckWorks, I think it could have been managed and handled a lot more quickly, really. It didn't hurt the business because we still had woodcat cam running and still in production. So it's taken a long time, but it hasn't really affected us too terribly. And I think now, after working with you at DuckWorks for the last 6 months or so, we're really able to roll it out to our other designer project managers that haven't started using it yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so, full disclosure, we've been working together, as you mentioned, for 6 months. I think initially we engaged, mostly just kind of, hey, where are you guys at? Can I offer some advice? What direction would I do? Right. And then I think from there it bridged into, and so the way we're working together, consulting specifically on Microvellum development, because I'm going to get people that are going to listen to this and say, hey, can you do that for me? Is something that I still oscillate back and forth on. And it's really mostly just due to my time limitations, but it's something I enjoy doing. And I think is something that I hope to be able to kind of productize and offer essentially a version of what I've done for you guys. And this is also something that is, the different users of Microvellum have different philosophies, but what I've worked with you guys on is very much mine, which is making use of formula-driven materials. And so it's really utilizing the foundation library, the products themselves as they are built as much as possible from Microvellum. Because the way they built the Microvellum library is they're constantly updating it, right? And so the library, you've got your products and sub-assemblies, and then you've got your spec groups. And the spec groups are kind of like they pull the strings of the products. Microvellum can push out updates to the products, and you can keep using your spec groups to drive them, right? But the reason that's important is because if you can also fully customize your products, and then if Microvellum issues updates, the way the update works right now is it's going to overwrite your changes at the product level. And so as much as possible, if you can kind of make changes to the spec groups, you get the benefit of those future updates from them as much as possible. So where we started, though, was we actually started with just, hey, you guys are transitioning from a different software to Microvellum. This is a good point to change and kind of revisit everything. Let's start with your CAD template, how you organize just drawings, how you connect Microvellum to the organization of your drawings. Because that's also something that they don't, they show you how to use the software, right? But it's just like any other software. Everybody kind of decides and figures out how are we going to use it. And there's a lot of different decisions in that, the type of manufacturing you do. So, but in general, what we worked on, what I recommend is, this organization of, hey, you have a room template and you have a cover series template. And when you set up a new project in Microvellum, you've got your cover series, which is actually a room in Microvellum, and it creates a drawing, and you've got all your project level information in there. And then we've got a room template, which is as many rooms as you need. And that room could be a physical room in the job. It could be an area, it could be a groupings, but there's a DWG and there's products grouped in that. And that's also a little bit different than I think WoodCAD/CAM and other software, that they don't quite have that same hierarchy that Microvellum does, where you can have a project and spec groups and everything that's universal to any of the products in any rooms in that project, right? That organization hierarchy operates a little bit differently, I think.
I think you're right. And I wouldn't even really claim to totally know the IX hierarchy, but I from what I do know, it is different. And actually I really like how Microvellum organizes projects and the cover them. And incidentally, like the whole notion of a cover and spec template as a room or as a piece of a project, and then the room templates. We hadn't heard of that until you started working, and I think it's great.
Yeah, and to build on that, what we set up is then what Microvellum has is these project properties, and you can actually create your own to where you can populate information from Microvellum into your template, into your title block, right? And so that was the next kind of layer of what we built, is that allowed you can in Microvellum have project properties and room level properties. And so one, you can have a single title block that's set up to where when you create the room, your project name, your job number, your contractor information, all that stuff kind of automatically populates into your title block, right? And you put it in once in Microvellum. And then there's some room level information, like, okay, well, this room is called index or cover or whatever you guys decide to number it and name it. And so setting those things up, and I think I've got a video somewhere. Microvellum has some articles. I'll probably link to those in the show notes here, but that was the next level. It's like, hey, let's get this really set up so the workflow for your users is as seamless as possible. Because there's a lot of things that people will even implement Microvellum and they're still doing all this manual stuff. They're not recognizing the benefits of what is possible. And a lot of times it just, one is, there's not really a lot of resources out there, frankly, to kind of pull the pieces together and say, hey, you can do all this stuff, but if you follow this path, you're going to be successful. You can customize it, and that's really what we tried to offer. And what I'm trying to do with DuckWorks is, I've spent 12 years struggling with this same stuff in different companies. And so I figured out a lot of stuff the hard way, and trying to bring that day one to companies like you is the goal. So then in the room template, it's the same thing. And then it even goes into model space, as you've got to make a decision in your organization. Hey, where am I going to put my products? How am I going to put my elevations? And there's things that we set up there. Because I've worked with a lot of people that it's kind of just a free for all in model space, right? And if you have two engineers working and they kind of do things differently, it's hard to work behind. So really, it's just setting up that structure. And I think that obviously that was new to you and new to Paul, and now Nicole will be learning that. But I think that what we did there, helped you guys really be able to dive in a lot faster, I imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there were two, like when we finished up our training with Microvellum a couple of years ago, the two significant takeaways or pieces I knew we were lacking. One was in the drawing templates, and as our people started to try to use Microvellum, they're like, I need to produce drawings, and I'm struggling with the templates as they are, and line weights and some of the other things that were that you helped us with. So the drawing templates and the organization was a huge piece, and the spec groups were a huge thing. I mean, when I first got, we did a day or whatever in training on spec groups, and I didn't. It's not that I didn't understand it. I was just kind of like, is this really how we're going to do this? And we touched on formula driven materials in there, but there was, there was no way we were going to get to that starting up. And in the spec group management, without a wizard like you've helped us with, I think is very daunting for the users. Going in and find and replace and try to get all the materials and the pointers correct for the spec group you do was a huge piece of why we didn't adopt it internally more quickly.
Right. Yeah, I want to drill into that a little bit, because this is something, and for those listening, there's just always this line in these conversations, right? Because, we don't want to, I'm a big proponent of Microvellum, and as you are, right? You guys have bought it, but we're also users, and we're probably some of their most critical, critics, right? Like, we want to make it better. We want to see it better. And there's things that can always be improved, right? So hopefully everybody's getting kind of, this is a real, like, I think there's a lot of people listening that struggle with these same things, these questions, and don't really have any resources to go to for them. So all that being said, though, like, from a user standpoint, like, this is still pretty fresh for you as a new adopter, and you in particular. Like, when we first met, like, you had already dove into Microvellum very deep. I don't know if you see it this way, but from my perspective, I've used it for many years. Like, it really well, and you really dove in very fast. And we're really using it a lot, but there were some, like you said, some things that, like, hey, I don't know. I understand this is what they told me to do. I can go in and find and replace, but you were asking me some questions like, is this really the best way? Because it seems like there should be something easier than this, right? But you didn't know if there is or not. Like, how can we make this easier? I get what they're saying to do. And that workflow, kind of the default legacy Microvellum workflow. And really, this is any software, like CAD/CAM is similar, Cabinet Vision is similar, is you have template materials that are just kind of, okay, I've got white melamine 2-sided that's 3/4 thick, and I've got my face sheet goods, but now I got to make them specific to this job. And so you go in and you find and replace, okay, white, now it's black. So I'm going to, anywhere that says white, black. And that's a function you can do, right? And then you have pointers that say, hey, all my doors, and I can assign a material to it. It's somewhat of a manual process. And you have materials assigned to pointers, and you kind of sort and stuff, but it's very confusing for users, because you're trying to relate that not only to the software and the products, but also to what a cabinet is. Like, okay, well, what is the pointer name for my door? What is the pointer name for my finished end, or whatever I call it? And, oh, we've got one-sided material that's face up and face down. It gets kind of confusing. And this is wherein formula materials come in. And the jump to that of why it makes sense, even for Microvellum users, can be confusing, but it's really just as simple as, like, anywhere in the past you would be doing find and replace. Think of that as just, if that's formulated, instead of me having to go say right click, find and replace everywhere I see PL1 with PL2. If I just have a text box that I can replace PL1 with whatever my laminate is, whatever my face is, as well as some options that kind of, the logic behind it is there, and I simplify what my user needs to interact with. That's really the goal, is kind of to make it 90% of your users, they just need to go to one place, and there's going to be options that give them help text and say, here's what you need to do. Okay, what are the outside of your cabinets going to be? Oh, the outsides are going to be wood veneer 1. Okay, what's the inside of your cabinet going to be? We don't need them thinking about face up, face down, finished ends, any of that. Just what's the outside, what's the inside, what's your core? Some of these basic options kind of in a more user-friendly terminology and format. That's the core of the goal of it. And then through that, though, what that allows us to do is we have to answer questions that are based on decisions you make about how you build things. And it also, getting to where you can have that wizard set up the way forces us to understand how you build cabinets one time to where we build that logic. And I think when we went through that process, it also made you rethink some things as well, right? Like, we talked about your stretchers and nailers and backs and, okay, well, yes, you've got finished ends, but 90% of the time for you guys, you really try to only have 2-sided material or melamine, right? And so it's, okay, let's build the logic of, hey, do you have applied finished ends or that type of stuff? And I just, the one thing I vividly remember was, you were asking me, and I think we had a call where I was trying to teach you my suggestions on spec groups, but still the find and replace. And I remember you asked me, like, there's got to be an easier way. And I think I showed you an example of another client I had done this for. And you were like, yeah, how do we get that? Okay, that's so much better, right? Do you remember like that time of like the transition from, okay, I'm trying to figure out Microvellum. Like, what were some of the things that now, like it makes more sense and it's easier now to transition and the benefits, I guess, of the way we've structured things now?
Well, yeah, and I think I would go back to reiterate your point about Microvellum generally. I mean, we're internally very happy with, and I mean, I've been using it pretty in depth over the last year, and the modeling capabilities and being able to share. I mean, we're generally getting on Zoom calls with customers and clients and reviewing the model before we ever produce shop drawings, which saves, I would argue a couple rounds of shops going back and forth, 2D shops going back and forth, when you can spin around a model and really, really show it to somebody and answer 80% of the questions that you have. So the modeling capabilities and the transition for us from getting product out into the shop from Microvellum. So the work order creation and the way it's organized on that front, and the ability to check materials and then produce the optimization patterns and the programming has really all been great. Like, it really hasn't been a problem for us. So to your point, so much of the software has been great. And now to get back to the spec groups in particular, I think it was, when we first went through it, in my mind, there's the geometry of the model and the components that the model is using. And we don't care about color, in that respect. We care about how thick is the material and how big are the sheets going to be and all that kind of stuff. And then there were the colors and the one side, two side, and they seemed to be, they were hard to kind of separate those two components. And I think, and I struggled with it internally for a while. And then when we got into the wizard with you, and when you showed us that first wizard that you had done for somebody, the light did go off. We were like, that's exactly what we're looking for, because that's really because for us too, it's important to say, this project is a frameless project, or it's face frame or whatever. And to get through the geometry of the model and how big the space is and the walls and all that is one piece. And the ability to set those materials in the wizard and come back later and specify the particular color or the particular species is great and is super important, because we really want our designer project managers to be able to work with somebody. And, they most, in a lot of projects, they don't know the color or the species early on. So it allows us to continue with the design, do all the geometry, all the layout, understand how the boxes are going to be constructed and all that, and then apply those colors at whatever point through the project they're determined.
Right.
So, yeah, and then to sum that up a little bit, the wizard that you showed us originally and have helped us with was a complete eye-opening and ease of operation for our operators. That was something that we hadn't really been able to get over with just with pulling up the spec groups and modifying those for a particular color material for a particular project. And it's allowing us to propagate Microvellum further in our operation, much with much greater ease.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful because it's one of those things that sometimes when things make sense to you, I'll explain to people, like, it makes sense to me the way I've structured it, but it's helpful to have somebody else when the light clicks and you're like, okay, there's something that's valuable here to somebody else that to you, it's allowing you to focus on the important parts of what you're trying to do and not have to get lost in the weeds of, the behind the scenes. Right. And two, I think everything you guys use it for now is possible without what we've built, but for some context, what he's describing as the wizard in Microvellum, you've got spec room components and you have all these options that are kind of in the globals and in the material wizard and these different places. And what we've basically done is just take what Microvellum's built. I've used the same logic they've had and pushed all of it to look to a central place that's called the project wizard, so that the users really only ever have to go there. They've got one interface that controls everything for your spec groups. And so that simplifies in the head of a user that's not familiar with how they don't need to understand really anything other than if I've got a finish, I've got a spec group. If I have another finish or another set of construction information, like I copy the spec group and I pick different options and I assign that to a cabinet. It's really that simple. This cabinet is assigned to my PL1 spec group. Then all the options I chose in that spec group are going to carry through to the cabinet. If I have a different set of slides or a different interior finish, then I make a different spec group and I assign it to it. And then setting it up in a way to where there's an order and a hierarchy to the options you see. So I think usually we start with those simple options, like for you guys, hey, is this a face frame job or is it a frameless job? That's something that your designers know from the get-go, and if it changes later, they can just switch that easily. They don't have to re-put in new cabinets, I don't think. Maybe you guys have a face frame library, but there's options there that are tied to that, right? And so similarly, the other options, okay, it starts with Vogo defaults, and then you can change those. So like your default slide, we know now we've got it set up. Your undermount drawer slides as the defaults. And then, so the designer could really make 2, 3, 4, 5 options. Hey, what's our finish? If I don't know, it's a laminate. I know this is a frameless job. I know I'm using laminate. And then I think that we have those options as well. Is it laminate or is it veneer or is it melamine maybe? And then even that, you guys have some standard melamine colors you use for your interiors, and we put those options and then a custom option. So it was really just catering what Microvellum provides to, okay, how do we make fewer steps for 90% of the jobs for Vogo specifically? And then make it to where if things change throughout the course of the job, it's easier to make those changes. So, hey, I can switch from laminate to veneer in the spec group, redraw my cabinets. I've got those changes. And it was really interesting going through, because like understanding the way you think, in particular, Matt, because like you described, okay, I understand the way I think of it. There's the geometry. Am I getting the structure of the cabinet right? And that's independent of what are the finishes. In Microvellum, it's really not independent, but we can structure it to where you can continue with the structure and then make these other decisions later if needed about the finishes. And so trying to structure it the way that you're thinking, which is logical. But when they're writing the software, they're not necessarily thinking the way Matt's going to use it. So now where you're at, right? That's always something we're continuing to evolve and develop. Your spec groups, the library, how you guys use it. Now you're introducing the rest of your team to it. And in a way now it's not just they need to go through Microvellum training, but they've gone through that and it's now go through Vogo Microvellum training to some extent, right? Okay, now we've got templates, we've got a process, we've got spec groups. So, we talked, I think yesterday about, okay, so now Paul can sit down with Nicole and say, hey, let's create a project together and we're going to walk through the step of what Vogo does now. And you basically have your own process for that. I create a project, I copy my spec group, and I create my cover series, I create my rooms. You have specific steps. And for, in my mind, like that makes it easier to onboard somebody, to train somebody, because I think in the void of that, it's just kind of like, well, we just need them to kind of learn everything and then figure out what to do with it. But now they're kind of learning an SOP, right? It's like, hey, if we have a franchise, right? Okay, this is the way that Vogo uses this software and the steps you take. And as long as you follow those steps, you're going to be successful.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, when we went through the original training, there were, I think, 6 of us internally, Vogo people, that did it. And the most intimidating components after that 2-week period or whatever were spec groups and the spreadsheets. And that's just our group internally. It was like, I don't really want to dive into the detailed spreadsheet to modify something in the cabinet.
Right.
And we've kind of learned that you really don't have to much if you don't want to. And right. So everything we can do to make that operator experience a little more front-ended, drop-down selections is a huge, huge help.
Awesome. Well, I think there's a lot of people that are in a similar boat, and a lot of business owners that are, having to make similar decisions. And I know this is something everybody struggles with. Hey, what engineering software do I use? Or I'm transitioning now. What do we do? How do we get past that? So I'm hoping, hearing your perspective, I think will add a lot of value for a lot of our listeners. Before we wrap up, there's a couple of questions I like to ask every guest, and I'm curious to get your perspective. So the first one, what do you see changing over the next 5 to 10 years in the millwork industry?
Well, a question that I've had, especially as, I don't know, in the US, Revit is, I believe, at least commercially, the most widespread design software. And the more we can, well, let me back up a second. The biggest thing, what I want to see us Vogo do internally is do much more sharing of a 3-dimensional model of what we're producing. It's so much better for our customers and clients and owners to see and really understand what this thing's going to be, because there's still a lot of people that can't really see 2-dimensional drawings that well. And even if you can, there are a lot of details that you can't pick up in a 2D flat set of shop drawings. So personally, I want the model to start to propagate in, I guess I would say, 3 directions. Up front with the design professional or homeowner or whoever, like, this is the model, this is what we're going to be manufacturing for you. And using that more, it's hard to get approval from a model, because you still need dimensions and you still need to be able to sign something, but a mechanism to effectively get approval by viewing and rotating and looking at a model. The second direction is to the shop. We send out hard copy drawings for each project to the shop, and those are necessary, but we really want the shop to be able to see this model. And when they have a question, they can pull up the model and rotate it around and understand what's going on in that particular piece of millwork or cabinet. So propagating to the owner, design review, into the shop. And then the last piece is in the field, because we install about 50% of what we produce. And whether we're installing it or not, I'd really like to be able to send the model out on a tablet or something so that the guys in the field can look at what we did and really, it's a shame because this super powerful modeling software that is Microvellum with AutoCAD on the front end is really only enjoyed by the person operating Microvellum, and
Right.
it should propagate. And I fast forwarded into Revit. I mean, what would be great is if we could send our model in a format that could be pulled into the architect or engineer's Revit model, just like the plumbing, mechanical, electrical engineers do.
Right.
So that would be great if you could go even further upstream that way. So I guess that's how I would see it. And the notion of truly getting into rendering, I mean, we have it. It's a three-dimensional model. It's ready to be rendered. I want to go further on that front, and even maybe get to a virtual reality experience for, in particular, the residential owners, so they can really see what they're about to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on.
Yeah. So further engagement and sharing of the data, the design data, the models, with the other trades upstream through the design process, because that is something that, especially on the commercial side, BIM coordination is more and more becoming required, but it's still a very, clumsy and a lot of times nobody knows really how to go about it and do it in an efficient way. And so if there's more integration between the different softwares and kind of instruction and process on how to do that. On the rendering side, and I know we've mentioned this, but actually the episode whoever's listening to this episode before this, I interviewed Jonathan Blackburn of Vortek Spaces.
Oh, really?
And that's really what they do. Yeah. So Vortek Spaces does have that ability. Again, it's another software. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but you can take from Cabinet Vision or Microvellum your 3D model, bring it into Vortek Spaces, render it, and they do have some virtual reality capacity. And I actually learned in that episode they started first with 3D TVs, and it was like a 3D showroom, and then they realized 3D TVs aren't kind of sustainable, but we can make the software that you can use in a VR headset as well.
That's great. I called him after he had mentioned his operation a couple months ago, and we talked, and it was great. I just haven't done anything with it yet, and so I'm going to go back and watch that episode. Yeah,
I think that they're making a lot of good headway there. But what you described with Revit is definitely something I would love to see. I would love to see, just like Microvellum can model in AutoCAD, if there was an integration in the future where you can take the same thing and say, okay, instead of AutoCAD, I want to model it in Revit. Or there's a way to take at least my model and push it in, because that requirement, and there's kind of a dumb way of doing it. You could take a 3D model and import it as just a block in Revit, basically. But I think the intelligent way of doing that, and even furthermore, maybe pushing it upstream where, architects can have Vogo's cabinet library, and that's what they use from the start, in a way that you're able to say, oh, you guys spec'd Vogo cabinets and you've already gone 50% of the way to model what you want. Let's pull that in as a starting point for the job. So
you're right. That is exactly, because we can't really, we get DWG files all the time from architects and designers, and those are great.
Yeah.
But I don't think we can, and we import those obviously and use them in Microvellum. It would be great if we could somehow take a Revit model and bring it in and start with that.
Yeah, because the way families work in Revit is very, very similar to Microvellum. And so I believe there's a way, and I know actually some companies who are kind of working on their own proprietary import-export of it, but I think a mainstream add-in application with that would be great. There's something I've looked at and this is going on a tangent, but there's a software out there. I think it's like MWF or something, but it's modular wood framing. Okay. So it overlays in Revit, and it allows you to take in Revit a wall that is just a cube basically, and it breaks it down into studs and sheathing. that then can be export manufacturing data for like modular framing. So if you were to actually offsite have walls built to your Revit model, it actually builds that in. So you can take a Revit model that has walls and say, okay, I want this wall to be a 2x6 stud wall with OSB sheathing, and it actually breaks that down, and just kind of like a die wall in Revit or in Microvellum, it gives you that. So I see parallels between that it would be like, okay, how could we take that software that works in Revit and do the same thing but for cabinetry and millwork?
Right.
On the flip side of that, what do you see staying the same in our industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
That's an interesting question. I guess the materials. We haven't seen. I don't think we've seen a super innovative material come along in a while, and maybe that kind of goes without saying. I mean, some of the pre-finished real wood veneers, those have probably come in and been a little more present in the last several years. But I think we're probably going to be using the same materials for a while. Maybe sheet sizes will increase.
But largely, it's still going to be flat sheets, cut on a saw, CNC, a lot of 2D machining and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Well, awesome. I really appreciate, Matt, you making time to do this. I apologize for the technical difficulties I had in the middle there.
No problem.
But if anybody wants to reach out and find out more about Vogo Cabinets, or ask any questions, what's the best way for them to reach you guys?
Probably an email.
Okay.
And it should probably go to Jackie, Jackie at vogocabinets.com, VOGO, cabinets spelled out with an S.com. You could send it to me, but I might not get to it.
Yep. Well, we'll link her in the show notes, and your website. So, I really appreciate you coming on and kind of sharing you guys' story and your journey. There's a lot of value here for it, and look forward to continuing to working with you guys and hopefully having you on again in the future.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. See you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to stay up to date about industry insights, new content, and our community of millworkers? Go to DuckWorksMW.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll see you in the next episode of Verify in Field.